The Moondrop Blessing 3 just got released, and yep, it is the most hyped thing that we'll probably see in a very, very long time, an update to what is arguably the best $300 IEM ever made in history. And of course, understandably, everyone is either waiting on or asking for my impressions on the Blessing 3 before pulling the trigger. But as you can tell from the title of this video, there is really only one problem. I tuned it. Nah, I'm just kidding. Or am I? Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. I'm be going to Munich high-end in about a couple of months. And of course, it being Germany, I have to rent a car. Now, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to be pretending to be German so that I can get a discount. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Crin, what the hell are you talking about? You can't just do that. Well, let me just introduce you to NordVPN. Yes, this is an ad read. In case you're living under a rock, NordVPN is your premier virtual private network that allows you to spoof your locations to any of the 60 countries that they have in their catalog. And as I've mentioned, I myself have managed to spoof my location to that of a German, and therefore I've managed to skip the tourist tax and have saved 40% on my car rental during my trip in Munich. Not only that, with location spoofing, now you can finally surf the wild and choppy waters of the internet as a true free agent. No longer are you restricted by inane things like geographical locations. Netflix's true catalog is now open to you for your perusal. Go to nordvpn.com/crinacle to get an exclusive deal plus 4 extra months. That's nordvpn.com/crinacle. Support the people who support me. Okay, back to the video. Now I know what all of you are thinking, like, Crin, what the fuck? You're supposed to be reviewing the Blessing 3. Why are you telling us you're not going to? Well, first and foremost, we have to talk about the Dusk. When I first ranked and reviewed the Blessing 2, there was no expectation of a collaboration. There was no reason for me to believe that I would then be working with Moondrop on a new variant of the Blessing 2. And therefore, I would say, back then, at that point, I was relatively unbiased. There was no monetary incentive. There was no incentive for me to say good things about the Blessing 2, or even bad things about the Blessing 2. Thereafter then came the Dusk, and as we all know, the Dusk is a retuning of the Blessing 2 in which me, took a cut of the profit. Therefore, as per usual, I say this with every single one of my collaborations, I will not rank, I will not review, I will not even mention them or acknowledge their existence in any of my other reviews. And that was my way of kind of controlling the conflict of interest that I had with all of these collabs. Now, however, it is very different because with the release of the Blessing 3, everyone now expects there to be a new Dusk model, a new retuning by crinacle. And yes, I'm just here to confirm that, yes, now it's in the works. But because it's in the works, that is where we come into a different kind of morally gray ethical issue. The problem that I can see right now with me reviewing the Blessing 3 and of course working on a Blessing 3 Dusk is that any review that I make of the Blessing 3 can now be construed as a kind of like a stand-in, a proxy for the eventual Dusk model. Essentially right now, I am massively incentivized to talk good things about the Blessing 3 because, you know, there's going to be a Blessing 3 Dusk. And if I say good things about the Blessing 3, it means that I'm kind of, in a way, saying good things about the Blessing 3 Dusk. And you can see where the ethical conflicts start to arise. So as much as it's going to disappoint a lot of people, unfortunately, I'm going to treat the Blessing 3 like how I treat the rest of my collabs. I won't be ranking it, I won't be technically reviewing it, and I will try my best not to mention it in the context of other products that are in its similar price bracket or its competition. But since you're all here, I'm assuming that all of you are still expecting a video, so what better time than to do a small story time of the history of Moondrop's most popular model and how we got here. Some of you smartasses in the comments might be asking, Crin, there is a Blessing 2, so where is the Blessing 1? Well, fret not. This is the Moondrop Blessing. just Blessing. Honestly, I don't even know what the release date for the Moondrop Blessing 1 is. I myself had reviewed it back in September of 2018, which in the context of the IEM hobby, basically 10 million years ago. Moondrop's reputation actually didn't come from the Blessing 1 or even any of the Blessing series. In fact, I think it started way back with the original Moondrop Nameless, which wasn't even an IEM. It was a pair of earbuds. Back in 2018, I thought that the Blessing 1 was a revolution. It was one of, if not the first IEMs to be intentionally targeting the Harman in-ear target, which at the time was completely radical. Back then, it was great. Till today, it still remains great. The only really big problem that I have with this is that it has the limpest bass that I've ever heard in any kind of hybrid. This thing apparently has a dynamic driver woofer, but still sounded like absolute ass in the bass frequencies. It sounds like it has a BA woofer. I don't know how they did it, but that was the Blessing. That was back in 2018. I'm not gonna judge. Now, as I've said, Moondrop's reputation didn't really start out with the Blessing 1. Now, they did have their first spotlight in the Western market through the Blessing 1, but what really propelled them into superstardom was what I feel like was their first dynamic driver IEM, or close to it, which was the Moondrop Canas, however else you pronounce it. And that was the Blessing 1. Not a lot of things really happened about it. It was released, it was not that popular, but it was the beginning. Now, what happened next, on the other hand, was where things started getting really interesting. This is the legendary Moondrop Blessing 2 with its iconic copper orange cable. Believe it or not, the Moondrop Blessing 2 was released in early 2020 with almost zero fanfare. No one really thought much about it. Oh, Moondrop created an update to their not very popular Blessing 1, and so people didn't really think too much about it. That is to say, until a certain someone, me, released a review titled The Moondrop Blessing 2 Kilobuck Threat. The word kilobuck killer has been used many times to try and hype up a product. And it is a term that I do not put out very lightly. But when it comes to the Blessing 2, that is where I feel like the term really justifies itself. If it's not the Blessing 2 that is the kilobuck threat, then what is? I would say probably after that review was where the Blessing 2 really exploded in popularity. This was more like mid of 2020. And thereafter, it became the $300 benchmark. Everyone else was comparing whatever new releases that just came out to the Blessing 2. This was in 2020. Even till today, anything that comes out in the $300 range is immediately compared to the Blessing 2. And still, for whatever reason, it remains out on top. Sure, there are gonna be kilobuck IEMs that would definitely outperform the Blessing 2. But in general, as an average, most kilobuck things, I feel, according to my ranking list, can't even touch this. And then afterwards, of course, we come into the Moondrop Blessing 2 Dusk, which looks exactly like this, which is why I don't have an extra unit. The Blessing 2 Dusk back then was a very novel concept, or at least the concept of a collaboration between, a manufacturer and a reviewer. Now, I really like the Blessing 2, as you can tell from all the reviews that I wrote. So I thought to myself, oh, this would be an amazing base, an amazing springboard to work off of for my next collaboration project. I didn't even think that Moondrop would be accepting of such a project. And yet here we are. Of course, they accepted. The changes that I made for the Dusk was simply just reducing the upper mid-range of the Blessing 2, shifting the highest point from about 2.5K up to 3000 Hertz. And of course, the flat mid-range to the bass boost, which is something that I really liked. Now, I would never say that the Dusk is better than the Blessing 2, but simply that the Dusk fits more of my philosophies more closely than the Blessing 2. Again, this tuned slightly more towards IEF neutral with that flat to bass boost. Those are things that I like and something that I'll consider my own house sound. And now we have come to 2023 with the introduction of the newest line to the Blessing series, the Blessing 3. If you look from the outside in, you might think that the Blessing 3 is simply a cosmetic change from the Blessing 2. But oh, you would be so wrong. The Blessing 3, in effect, has completely different drivers, different BAs. They use an isobaric dynamic driver, which is essentially two dynamic drivers in opposing phases, which means that if one pushes, the other one pulls, which is why it's called a push-pull setup. All of that is just nerd talk to say that it uses two DDs for bass. That's about it. One of the biggest complaints about the Blessing 2 in terms of the non-sound things is its abnormally large nozzle, which has been thankfully fixed. In the Blessing 2, you have a nozzle that's a large and girthy 6.5 millimeters, whereas on the Blessing 3, it is significantly reduced to simply 5.8 millimeters. Still chonky, but in the context of the Blessing 2, massive improvement. The faceplates, of course, have been changed. It's much more faceted, whereas the Blessing 2 was flat, but that also means that you can't really get custom artwork on a Blessing 3, which is, again, a curse and a blessing. Now, the biggest change in the Blessing 3 is arguably in its tuning. And without going too deep into it, without this sounding like a review, the Blessing 3 is essentially a Duskification from the Blessing 2. You can see quite a lot of hallmarks in the Dusk when it comes to the Blessing 3. First of all, yes, the peaks have shifted from about 2.5 to about 3000 Hertz. The bass rise is a lot more my speed, the flat into the boost up there instead of the linear rise the Blessing 2 has. Essentially, the Blessing 3 really does go closer to that of the Dusk. Not too much, I still can change this to fit more towards my preferences, but you can tell that there's quite a bit of inspiration. But I have to confirm once again that I did not tune the Blessing 3. I don't even get a cut of the profit. So yes, while I still find that there is a conflict of interest, it's not at this moment in time a monetary one. I had absolutely nothing to do with the Blessing 3. Let me just share with you an interesting story. Because when I was tuning the Dusk with the CEO, which was Herbert Zheng, we had a conversation about the amount of bass that the Dusk had. And in his words back then, it was too much. The Dusk project initially was very close to not even coming true because he was like, wow, you put in so much bass into this thing. I'm actually kind of scared that this thing is not going to sell. And I had to assure him, I had to sit my boy down and told him, my guy, people love bass. He was kind of hesitant back then, but now with the Blessing 3, I think he kind of came around and be like, you know, maybe bass is good. And let me tell you, yeah, no matter how the two graph, like the Blessing 2 and the Blessing 3, the Blessing 3 sounds like it has more bass, which is, you know, rather interesting at that point. Now, there are many things that I can criticize the Blessing 3 for, which I will not go into because if it means that I'm not going to shill the Blessing 3, it also means that I'm not going to criticize it. The conflict of interest goes both ways. But the most that I can say is that the Blessing 2 is a very high bar to clear. And the Blessing 3, at the very minimum, you could call it a side grade. At the very minimum. There are many good changes, many less than ideal changes, but overall, I would call it, again, at very minimum, a side grade. And I think that is as far as I can say without, again, going too deep into like actually making this into a review. Once again, recapping, I am now massively incentivized to talk many good things about the Blessing 3 to raise its sales and to raise the sales of a potential and currently in progress Dusk model. And therefore, I will not be ranking or reviewing the Blessing 3, which I know is a massive disappointment to all of you, but you know, that's really the reason that you all subscribe to me. So now let me just avoid that can of worms, listen to the other reviewers. I'm not the only one who's going to be talking about the Blessing 3. Clearly, it's going to be the most popular model of 2023, no doubt. Watch the others, form an opinion of yourselves, look at the graphs, look at the measurements, all the other things, yada, yada, yada. And we're now in the golden age of IEMs, where you have just so many resources, so many voices to make your best purchasing decision. You don't have to just listen to me, and therefore, I don't think me not reviewing the Blessing 3 is that big of a loss, really. But that's it. Yes, the subliminal messaging should be quite clear. Dusk coming out soon. Trademark. So look forward to that. Hopefully I'll be able to meet your stratospheric expectations in time. And of course, now I shout out my big money boys. Here are all of your beautiful names. If you're subscribed to the $20 tier on my Patreon. And for those subscribing to my $30 tier, allow me to speak out your beautiful names: Dennis, McMadface, Crinacle, Alicia Burrito, Alex Frit, Andrew Posichronic, Pitt Vanderwit, Amber Sweeney, Jermaine, Peanut Butter, Drazar, 404, user not found, Seraphim, and Wata. I thank you all. All right, so the obligatory Blessing 3 video done. See you next week, and don't die. Fuck off.